Coming up with a surprising release of one DeAndre Hopkins just a few days ago, we debate whether or not he should be brought into the New York Football Giants fold, how Darius Slayton feels about the current wide receiver room, and where we go from here in what feels like a very interesting and exciting New York Football Giants offseason. Yeah. Oh, it's the OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, looking kind of hazy in the glow. Got some tech to work out here. And over there, you got the healthy, wealthy, and wise Mr. Andrew Makowitz. Andy, I'm considering just singing the intro myself. I think I kind of got the beats.
I think we should give it a try. Next episode, I think the people want to hear your karaoke rendition. Maybe a couple hard ciders beforehand just to loosen things up, and we'll get those vocal cords stretched out.
Just get me in the right mindset, right? Put me in the place that I need to be. When we talk about the New York Football Giants in this offseason, it's been funny, man, because you come out of the draft and we feel like with Joe Schoen and he had these hits last year. At some point this offseason, we're going to talk about some of the injured players that still aren't on the field for the Giants, and some of them are some of those draft picks. But there's this sense that, like, right now, the Giants can do no wrong, right? Like, all the moves they're making are good. The foundation is sound. The vibes are great. So when a player like DeAndre Hopkins gets surprisingly straight out released by the Cardinals, which does save them some money while taking on some dead cap cash as well, it all of a sudden, I think, like, it shows the potential crack in the Giants collective, facade of, like, we're good, baby. Watch out. We're an 11-12 win team. Then this receiver comes out. They go, well, you got to get him, because if you get him, then we're legit. How do you feel about Hopkins? And then how do you feel about the kind of the sentiment around Giants, the collective Giants family?
Okay, so in a vacuum, putting DeAndre Hopkins in the wide receiver room for the New York Giants would be a plus. I think we can both agree that he is a very talented player, a Pro Bowl caliber player when healthy, that can contribute. And for all the people that say, well, look at our depth, we've got all these depth pieces, it's like, well, no, he would be arguably easily the most accomplished wide receiver if he were to join the Giants room. So the first thing is, in a vacuum, of course, the Giants should consider it. Now, the issue that we have, Adam, and we'll go into what Brian Daboll said in a second. We'd love to hear what he said at OTAs. But the reason why he got released is because the Cardinals couldn't find a trade partner for him because of some contractual issues. It's not that people don't want DeAndre in a vacuum on their team. It's that, reports have come out that there were some conversations with the Bills. There was conversations with the Chiefs about trading for DeAndre. And the second that Odell, coming off of the knee injuries and not playing for a while, signed a $15 million deal, DeAndre Hopkins camp was like, wait a second, like, I'm more productive and I've played more than him recently. Like, I should be getting $15 million. I'm not going to agree to a lower number. And so all of a sudden now the baseline is like, who's going to pay DeAndre Hopkins $15 million to join their team after you've allocated cap space to build out your roster over the offseason? Like, who has $15 million just lying around for a wide receiver?
And honestly, dude, if you get DeAndre Hopkins in a vacuum on your team, how is he going to catch the football? Like, I've never seen it in the history of the NFL. You can't, and there's not even a lot of air inside of those. They suck up. I don't want to get into a whole thing. But the bottom line is, I'm having fun, man. I do agree with you that, like, it's so funny. Guys that you perceive to have value, guys that are talented, but at certain positions, and then at certain price points, and at certain points of the offseason. Like, there's a world where DeAndre Hopkins just needs to wait for a team to get desperate, right? You just need one of the top end championship aspiring teams to have a critical injury at the wide receiver position. Suddenly they go, DeAndre Hopkins, turns out $15 million. I'm like, oh my God, I just found $15 million. You wouldn't believe it. But when it comes to the New York Football Giants, it's like, does it make them better? Yes. Did last year, as chaotic as the Cardinals were, did him coming back after injury and PED suspension and still look like a very dynamic, productive wide receiver at 30 years old, did that help me get over those last couple? Yes, it did. It did in a big way. The short-term buy, I think, is great. I'll ask you this. Do you think, like, is there a number that's too high if it's like the 1 year reset your market value deal and then go get your big contract if you think it's still out there? Like, do you think the Giants, would you be into it if you could say DeAndre Hopkins for 1 year where you're going to get maximum value out of his play?
I think that's a tough one because when you talk about a 1 year deal, the implications on the cap are so much harder for the Giants to figure out. Like
Right,
if
but so
it's a
you stretch
multi-year,
Leonard Williams' money and you make the room. Like, and
well,
that's not 1-to-1, but let's just say you shuffle Leonard Williams and it makes you the 1 year money for a Hop.
so I would be okay with it at a $10 million type
Oh,
of contract. I think
interesting.
that's about as high as I think I'd go. If he's asking for 15 or $17 million, it's just too much cap allocation when the Giants still have question marks that they're gonna have to plug holes through across the rest of the offensive line, the
Yeah.
the secondary. There's other places where the money can be better allocated, knowing that we have at least a group of wide receivers that can be serviceable right now. But can you just explain to me what Brian Daboll actually said when he was asked about this?
Well, this is where the Giants organization, since Joe Schoen came in and Brian Daboll as well, they've been somewhat transparent around certain things. And some people have said they should be cagier. And this isn't necessarily showing all your cards, but when asked about the potential of looking at a player like DeAndre Hopkins on the free agent market, like we said last year, anytime there is someone available that's a free agent, I would say Joe and his staff are going to look into it, research it, Daboll said. We talk about a lot of different players, regardless of who it is. That's part of our job to make sure we are doing our due diligence. Now, on the surface, you say that is your job. And I'd be disappointed if you weren't looking at everybody. By the way, high profile guys and guys that are considered to be potential backup candidates, right? Like you want to look at everyone that's available to make your team better. Also, though, the other way you can respond to that is just by saying, hey, he's a heck of a ball player, but we like the receivers we have in our room right now. And you mentioned it. Nobody in the Giants wide receiver room reaches the level of success and accomplishment on the field that D Hop has had. Did that surprise you at all? Do you read anything into that, or you just take it as like Brian Daboll maybe having some fun?
I am very, very happy that this is the response that Brian Daboll gives because you cannot win in the court of public opinion giving a polarizing thing like he is the missing piece to what the
Oh,
Giants need. You lose
that's
leverage. If you
exciting.
say no, thank you, you're basically outwardly saying that you don't want a guy that could potentially contribute. And so,
Right.
like for me, Adam, I like the non answer. This is the stock answer that is printed out somewhere in Brian Daboll's office that Joe Schoen gave him to say, whenever you are asked about any player, give this one response. Like he must have recited this no less than 300 times, just so that anytime a free agent becomes available or a guy's open for a trade, what do we say? We say this because we let Joe Schoen work in the background. We don't need to air this out. Like, you look at the Jets, they're like, nope, we're not interested. We like our wide receiver room. It's like, why do you need to say that outwardly? Just say we always are exploring all options. I do have a question though for you.
All
And the
right.
question is now we both kind of feel the same way. Like, could he contribute in, like I keep saying, in a vacuum? Sure.
Yeah.
Would it change your mind at all about how you approach DeAndre Hopkins if basically we knew that the other two teams that were involved were the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys? Is there something to be said about making sure that we don't allow one of the other teams in our division getting better at the same time?
Well, no, right? I mean, you can't, if to use your term, if in a vacuum the Giants were like, we're interested in D Hop, but like you said, hey, at 10 million, we would be interested. At 15, we just can't do it. It's too much. It's going to mess with our cap, whatever, blah, blah, blah. To turn around and hear that like the Eagles, who everyone assumes wants to be back in the Super Bowl again, right? And Dallas, who always comes up short, but perceives themselves to be ready to go to a Super Bowl every year. Those two teams being and who just jettisoned a big player in obviously Amari Cooper, like those teams being interested in it, like, yeah, does it make it a bigger challenge for you in the division? Of course it does. But this isn't, I don't know, man. You can't do that. This isn't, you know what it isn't? There's only one other sport that it makes me think of. It's baseball. Because in baseball, a lot of times, especially on the trade deadline, marginal costs, it's like, oh, the Yankees, they went out and acquired pitcher X, who the Boston Red Sox really wanted, and he has less value to the Yankees, but it's addition just by subtracting it from the other team. That's not like that in the NFL, right? You bring in D-Hop, that's the expectation, that's the goal. And I think the delineation here is the Eagles are where they are. I believe the Giants are a better team this year. I believe they will be a better team this year. But I don't believe that they're necessarily, and I know, I'll hit me in the comments, I don't think that they're a D-Hop away from being a Super Bowl contending team. They'll be a much better team. It'll improve things. But I just think that they're on this developmental track of improvement with a lot of young talent, including quarterback Daniel Jones. This just isn't the right timeline for a guy like this.
Well, there's one other caveat to this, and I
By the way, hold on. By the way, this coming from a guy who said they should consider trading for Devontae Adams last week. So just
listen, I get it. I get it. Well, Devontae Adams is considered the best wide receiver in the league, if not
yes,
1A, 2, 3, name your list. I don't think DeAndre Hopkins falls to that. What I think is interesting is also what would happen in the locker room if they signed DeAndre Hopkins for $15 million a year and they're still holding a hard line in the sand against Saquon Barkley, who still needs a contract himself. Imagine you allocate $15 million to a guy who got suspended for PEDs, sat out the last 2 games. There's reports that he sat out because he's like, I don't want to be a part of this tire fire. Imagine the Giants give that money
to our culture.
Right. PED suspension, doesn't want to play for his team, has basically asked out, and we're willing to hand him $15 million up front when Saquon Barkley can't get his deal done, even though he's been a cornerstone of the franchise, done everything that the team has asked him to do. Do you feel like that should factor into this?
And by the way, I don't know how much it does, but yes, it should. Because if you're and I mean this not even in the Saquon Barkley should be getting paid. We've had this discussion all off season. It is what it is, man. You're a running back and it stinks and whatever. We hope it works out. But to internally say, yeah, you know what? We could kind of just find some couch cushion cash here and get DeAndre Hopkins. But no, we still don't want to give Saquon Barkley his long-term deal. And so you can say, yeah, it makes us short-term successful. Again, I think if the ceiling became the Super Bowl, then you do it and say, and we're not paying Saquon. So be it. Because we have this aspiration. But the fact that I think it would be an improvement, but not to the highest possible level, it also makes it easier to say, we don't bring him in because we are building our new foundation of culture. And on that premise, even guys like Saquon Barkley, as good as he is in the locker room, as good as he is off the field, that's why even he can't necessarily get that new deal. Yeah.
Well, and what I think is also playing a factor in this is that OTAs have just kicked off. The Giants are there, and we're starting to see what this wide receiver room will look like. You hear they're talking about the pure speed that the Giants have. They have a ton of players that just are bursting with speed. Slayton, they asked Darius Slayton whether or not who's faster, him or Jalen Hyde. He's like, I got to go me. The guy's a really good player, but come on, it's still me. I think when you start looking at this, the Giants are starting to see what this wide receiver room could be. They want guys that have quick, short bursts, can get open in space. And it looks like they're starting to come up with this plan and this identity for this newly revamped wide receiver room.
And by the way, it doesn't help that D-Hop is kind of the model of wide receiver that would fit into this system really well also. But I think you're right. When we talk about, because Darius Slayton, when asked, he said, I think we have a lot of talent and we're building something here. Also, obviously, a guy like that, it's all competition. It would make everyone better. Everyone acknowledges that, right? So there's no need to downplay what DeAndre Hopkins is as a wide receiver, whether or not your team's going to add him. However, to your point, these OTAs, you're showing off a lot of speed. You're showing off Darren Waller, who now is being talked about because of the ties to the Kansas City model on the offensive side of the ball as being the X factor here. He's lining up all over the field. And if he's going to be healthy, then he's going to open up a lot of opportunities for all of those quick players. That is Jalen Hyatt now. It is also a player like Robinson, who, just on a quick aside here, does feel like everyone has gone from, wow, it was a higher pick than we thought last year. Didn't see that coming. Looks electric. Your concerns that you had, gets hurt, but comes back and shows, if he's going to be healthy, this kid is a dynamic playmaker. He's showing it again in OTAs. But when you look at that group now, you are talking about a ton of talent already there. It's about it coming together. And, you can't predict what they're going to accomplish over an offseason, but we have no idea how dynamic this offense is going to look another year into the system and with another key weapon like Jalen Hyatt. And Waller as well. It's hard for me. It's hard for me to feel like the Giants need to push a button to get better in an area that we don't even know how good it is right now. Like, we really don't. We know some players. Slayton, maybe we know, right? Even Hodgins, maybe we know. But there's a lot of X factors that we're going to learn about over the summer and over preseason as well.
Yeah, so the Wan'Dale Robinson piece, obviously, I've made it known that during draft time and leading up to
You're
it,
out
that
on him. You're out
well,
on him. I get it.
I was not as high on the selection where it was as other people were, and my biggest thing was he's so diminutive in size that
Yeah.
injuries are going to impact things. Obviously, that came to fruition. Give myself a small pat on the back, but he is a New York Giant, and I want him to succeed. And when he
Yeah,
did get the
Andy's
ball,
happy when Giants players get hurt. That's
yeah,
the underlying message
yeah,
here.
yeah, exactly. But that's the point. Is like he is a giant. I think he can be electric when he gets the ball,
Yeah.
especially when he gets it out in space. He's a guy that has that short, quick shiftiness that is thriving in Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka's system. So like I'm not out on him completely. And at some point, me personally, and maybe Giant fans as a whole, need to get over like when he was drafted and how he was drafted, because we talk about this all the time. Like, he is a giant. We're not going to go back and redraft the second or third round selections from a
Right.
draft
Right.
ago. He is here no matter when he was selected, and he needs to be a contributor. I think he can be that contributor. Obviously, he was off to the side, still rehabbing, catching balls from the jugs machine. But you talked about guys like Isaiah Hodgins, and he might be what a find he might end up being, because he
Yeah.
does have, they talk about his route running abilities and his ability to get open out of breaks and the timing that he ends up having. You saw the chemistry in just a short few weeks that he had with Daniel Jones. This can look progressively better and better. I think Hodgins can get better with more time. I think Jalen Hyatt can stretch the field once he starts getting chemistry with Daniel Jones. And if Paris Campbell is electric and we get one of Wan'Dale Robinson or Sterling Shepard being that shifty slot chess piece to move around, you really have something on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it's funny too, just on Hodgins, because it does feel like he brings the thing that Darius Slayton. Again, I think the collective we, have always been overcritical about the drops when you think of just relative to what that player and that role is supposed to be. But Hodgins is bringing those route combinations. That is something that it's not that Darius Slayton can't do them; he's just not as good at them, right? Like, he's a big player, but he doesn't have the frame maybe to wall guys off and to create that separation. And then the reliability when it does come to bringing in those passes and being a chain mover when called upon. So Hodgins, I think, certainly has the upside there. The only thing now I will say, let's close out on a really depressing note. When you go inside that wide receiver room, we know. So we mentioned Hodgins, Slayton, Campbell, Robinson, Hyatt. That already gets you to 5, right? Now, Jamison Crowder, that he's in this conversation with other guys, Colin Johnson, Khalil Pimpleton, right? It's all a group here. But I got to be honest with you. If this offseason goes the right way for the team, it could go very much the wrong way for Sterling Shepard, because he is still recovering. You've brought in other veteran type players at low cost. While I think the Giants have continued to do the honorable thing, and I respect it because I love Sterling Shepard, there's a world where if things develop really well for the wide receiver room, that Sterling Shepard it just becomes, it's not even that you maybe won't play again, you can't be successful. Every dollar counts. Like, they may end up having to look at his very minimal money and just say, yeah, like, we're going to carry you as our injured 8th wide receiver, knowing that you could be our 3rd wide receiver, but we just have never had that reliability from you. Like, I had that thought a couple of weeks ago, and it just bummed me the F out. And I think most fans would say, yeah, if that's the case, so be it. But I think it'd be brutal, because he's been the guy, maybe not unlike Saquon, who's battled through the bad times, has battled through injuries, and may not get to see all of that success come to fruition.
Well, you point out something very astute. We all know that Sterling Shepard's contract is also non-guaranteed. It's a veteran minimum $1 million deal. The Giants can cut him before the start of the season with no dead cap hit at all. So he is there to compete. And I think, to your point, Adam, if Colin Johnson already is catching a bunch of passes, he's running with the twos with Tyrod Taylor, but he caught like 8 passes in the 7-on-7 drill. He was like the guy that Tyrod Taylor focused on. He was coming out of training camp before he got hurt last year, a guy that we thought could really elevate his
Yep.
game. We thought he could take over Kenny Galladay's spot, which in hindsight looks like a bag of balls could have done that
Looks
at
like a
some
vacuum
point.
could have taken his spot.
But to that point is like when you start talking about the depth of this wide receiver room, we know Paris Campbell's going to be here. We know Darius Slayton's going to be here. We know Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalen Hyatt are going to be here. We've already mentioned 4 guys. The Giants are probably only going to carry 6. And when you talk about the upside of someone like Bryce Ford Wheaton, who has the size, he has the speed, his raw athletic score, his RAS score was a 10 out of 10. Like they say he is in the mold, like he has the body type of Calvin Johnson. It's like, can the Giants extract that type of athleticism out of him? When you start making those comparisons and you start talking about it, while we love, and I love Sterling Shepard, you're talking about a guy that is 30 years old coming off of 2 big, terrible season-ending leg injuries. It's like when you talk about, Bryce Ford Wheaton, you're talking about a guy 7 years younger, pure athleticism. Dollar for dollar, at some point, you got to think about which one could be here longer term rather than who's going to be here for the first 4 to 6 weeks and then could potentially get hurt. Like, I think there's a vision that the Giants have to have about long term in the next 3 years, who's going to be on this roster.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you mentioned a guy like Bryce Ford Wheaton. There's a lot of young players across this roster, and we've talked about this. I said it from the day that Joe Schoen was brought in. If you're here on this roster, you're going to have a fair shake, but you're not my guys. You're the other guys, right? Like you are from the previous regime, and that loyalty only goes so far. The responsibility of where a player was drafted only carries so much weight. And in the situation of Saquon Barkley, looks very differently. By the way, previous regime, this guy would have already been on to his second contract. It would have been massive. Sterling Shepard, very different scenario despite the high draft profile. He's 30 years old. There's a lot removed there. I think they've already done right by him and the potential to move on just to make sure that you give a younger player an opportunity to showcase what they're capable of. You have to be willing to do that. And that goes for any veteran that was brought in and any veteran that's still on this roster. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it unfolds, man. To tie a bow on it, I don't see the Giants being in on the Hopkins scenario. I think there's too many moving parts for it. And I think, again, they believe that their timeline is this progressive step up the staircase. And there's no reason to try to jump 3 steps ahead in this moment right now.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think there's also a scenario where guys like Wan'Dale Robinson and Sterling Shepard start on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list, kind of kick the can down a little bit. You never know what's going to happen with other injuries or how guys play out. So there is a world where some of these guys can stay on the roster, and maybe we have 8 or 9 guys that we're kind of figuring out who's gonna be there at the end.
Well, there's no world where Andy isn't finishing this and going to the golf course. When you have a matching hat and shirt combination, friends, you better hope you're playing golf because otherwise you might be a weird looking dude walking around town. Until next time, though, you get us on YouTube, you get us on the podcast feed as we continue our New York Football Giants coverage. Shout out to Big Dash Nose, who shouted us out over on Twitter as being one of the Giants family. Under the radar, they called us, which I think is an incredibly high compliment because we're just kind of doing our thing out here, man. We're living on the fringe of society. So until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.